Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, taking a look at some World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be talking about another premium ship. This time it is going to be the Tier 5 German premium battleship, Prinz Eitel Friedrich. As with all of my reviews, we're going to start with some history, jump into analysis, talk about the commanders, then stats, and finally finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around at all, there should be some time codes down in the description. The Prinz Eitel Friedrich was to be the third of an impressively optimistic 7 ships to be built in the Mackensen class of battlecruisers for the Kaiserreich Marine, or the Imperial German Navy, around the time of World War I. The ship itself was to be the next step forward in German battlecruiser design, improving upon the well-built SMS Derfflinger. Prinz Eitel Friedrich was laid down in 1915, but due to material shortages and Germany's changing naval strategy as World War I stretched on and on and on, the ship was never completed. Following World War I, most of the remaining operable German ships were required to be surrendered to the Allies, which led to the mass scuttling of ships at Scapa Flow, but in addition, Germany was prohibited from building additional battleships or cruisers with a displacement over 6,000 tons. So no matter which way you wanted to look at it, the Mackensen-class battlecruisers were not going to be completed. The version of the ship that you see in-game does vary somewhat from the original design of the ship. These changes are supposed to represent some refit that it would have had between World War I and World War II, had it actually been completed and survived. When we look at that design, you'll notice the addition of several dual-purpose 105s mounted along the upper deck of the ship, as well as some additional rangefinders. Honestly, I think this is a pretty respectful approach to updating the ship. The improvements to the secondary and AA was probably largely to accommodate the ship having to fight aircraft carriers fairly regularly on the PC, which at least at this point we don't have to worry about in Legends. They certainly could have done more. In reality, these casements around the sides of the ship would have very moist fighting conditions, and between World War I and World War II, you actually see most nations removing secondary guns from their ships that are like this, some of which were actually significantly higher mounted than this for that very reason. In any case, that's all the history for this ship, and a little insight into what you're seeing in the game. In Legends, the Prinz Eitel Friedrich is a very unique ship as far as German battleships go in the game. I was actually really looking forward to this coming out. On paper, the ship looks like it might be something between a Scharnhorst and Bayern, both ships that I really like. As it turns out, it ends up being a little bit more like a ship that's between the Bayern and the Hood, which also makes a lot of sense, particularly from a historic point of view, and I also really liked the Hood. But this ship doesn't really do it for me personally. It certainly can perform well, but it's very much not the German battleship experience you're familiar with. It's not all bad news though. The Eitel Friedrich is gifted with a good amount of speed, certainly above average for this tier, though you won't find yourself running down any French battleships or anything like that. The Prince has really nice firing arcs, particularly shooting forward, so she's very good at pushing and can kite in a pretty comfortable angle. She has good concealment for a battleship, an impressive array of secondary guns, and she does have reasonably tanky armor. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that work against her as well, including being pretty sluggish in a turn and having turrets that are fairly slow. At ranges and at completely random times, she is susceptible to some truly tragic amounts of damage at totally bizarre angles, but I can tell you for certain that she doesn't have a turtleback. All these characteristics basically mean that the Prinz Eitel Friedrich can't hang in there or maneuver well enough to truly brawl with other battleships or engage at close range with almost anything that has torpedoes. At least not very well, anyway. But the accuracy on this ship is pretty standard German accuracy, meaning, at least for me, I spend a lot of time wanting to fix my accuracy problem by driving closer, but driving closer just made it more likely that I'd quickly become a spectator. I know I rarely give equipment advice, because honestly these videos are already long enough, but I did want to add this right here. I found the best way to get around some of your lack of maneuverability is to keep your maximum speed as high as possible in the ship and use engine mod and a good dose of situational awareness to avoid torpedoes, where other German battleships may simply be able to pump up the volume on their stereo and turn to port or starboard. and you will have some time to pay a little bit more attention to what's going on. You don't have a particularly fast reload, and other than your heal and damage control, you don't have any other consumables, so you'll have plenty of time to ponder what is happening around you. This is kind of the silver lining to ships like the Ashitaka, which lack any sort of vision consumable. But as I described on the Ashitaka, this is something that I would otherwise call being more at the mercy of your team, or the enemy team, than average, and can unfortunately sometimes lead to somewhat frustrating or boring gameplay as you simply wait for your guns to reload to shoot, and probably miss your target all over again. Among the three obvious choices for Commander, Franz von Hipper is probably going to be your best choice here. Since you will be hopefully doing more damage at longer ranges, you're really going to need to do as much as you possibly can to get these guns to settle down. Hipper does have access to several abilities that are going to extend your range, and range will generally help your survivability as long as you maintain good angles. As a note, though gyrating drill bits does do nice things to your damage output, the drop in speed does really eat into what makes this ship effective, and I found myself wondering if I'm only going 26 knots, why I simply wouldn't play a Bayern, which has better guns and is virtually invulnerable to damage compared to this ship. Celiax is the other dedicated battleship commander, and you can do this, but I probably wouldn't do this just to make a secondary build. Due to your lack of turtleback, you're setting yourself up for a bad time. Instead, your best bet here if you want to use Celiax is just to lean into survivability by reducing fire and torpedo damage and getting yourself an extra heal. I think Sheer would actually be my second favorite choice between these three commanders, offering you a comfortable middle ground that gives you the options between improved survivability, little extra range, and something that neither of these dedicated battleship commanders can actually offer, this battle cruiser. That being the option for improved speed, and even lower sea detectability. Though I didn't really love this ship, flying around with 14-inch guns at 30 knots is an enjoyable feeling at Tier 5, though you do still run into some minor inconveniences when you still can't hit anything when you get there. For comparison purposes, I'll be using this von Hipper build in both the Prinz Eitel Friedrich and the Bayern. And this is basically the von Hipper build I found to be most comfortable when using this particular premium ship. For survivability, the Prinz Eitel Friedrich comes in with an extra 700 hit points, which is not enough to really matter all that much, but your armor protection is considerably lower, with only 6 to 320 millimeters of armor. This means that you're going to take a lot of fire damage from literally anything that shoots HE at you. Your superstructure is very weak. This is substantially less than the listed 13 to 350 millimeters that the Bayern enjoys. But quite a bit more important is the lack of a turtleback armor scheme on this ship, which is going to have a much larger effect on your life than these raw numbers. You do have better torpedo protection here with 27%, which is more or less in the middle of the pack as far as Tier 5 battleships go, but still quite a bit better than the Bayern. With 4x2 350mm guns, you have what are very nearly 14-inch guns, though this doesn't translate to less damage than other 14-inch gun ships, like the New Mexico. They do feel a little bit less punchy when it comes to defeating armor and actually scoring citadels. Ranging out to 15.9 normally, here you can see the effect von Hipper has on the range of this ship, and this is competitive basically with other Tier 5 battleships, and exactly the same as what you'll find on the Bayern. Due to the smaller gun caliber, you do have a 2-second reload advantage versus the Bayern, but at the cost of 400 damage. While this trade does favor the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, keep in mind that the smaller gun does also mean that you have less penetration or overmatch potential. It also translates to 500 less damage on HE shells, which isn't really that big of a deal, but Prinz Eitel Friedrich does lose a considerable 8% off of its fire chance. Though actually getting to use your secondaries is a much more harrowing experience in the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, your secondaries are actually superior to the Bayern. You have an extra pair of twin 105s on each side, 2 extra 150s as well, though the 150s do reload at a slightly slower speed than on the Bayern. The ships couldn't be much more different in terms of maneuverability, though they do share similar rudder shifts. Prinz Eitel is 3 knots faster than the Bayern, while the Bayern enjoys more than a football field's advantage in turning radius. And no, in this case, it doesn't particularly matter which version of sports ball you like. It's still true. This gives the Prinz Eitel Friedrich a lot more opportunity to reposition across the field, but makes getting out of the way of something a particularly ponderous experience. Finally, coming to concealment, this is not usually a huge deal for battleships because they are simply so large that it's difficult to really hide them. That said, the Prinz is the most sneaky giant metal ship at Tier 5 by about 200 meters, and it beats out the Baron specifically by 0.3 of a kilometer, and this may be an advantage you want to exploit with your commander build. And of course, last but not least, finally getting into some gameplay. We're going to be on Trap. The commander that I'm using for this particular replay is the same one that you saw just before we ran down the stats, so we got Von Hipper, and we're trying our very, very best for accuracy with this particular build. In any case, game starts out, we start rolling out towards C. You're probably going to see several of my biases as far as how I like to play ships throughout this, which is I like to be in the middle of the action. I feel like that usually pairs up well with German ships. Probably doesn't always in the case of the Prinz Eitel Friedrich. So basically, it is going to give us a little bit of an opportunity to see maybe where the ship could be played better, and realistically what we might expect if we were making better decisions. So obviously that first volley sets me on fire. That's great. That's pretty much just the life of a German battleship commander in the game. And I'm sure that Flammable Cannoneer isn't helping me too terribly much. Our guns are just about reloaded. We're going to throw some shells out there on the Aoba. Get a pretty nice dispersion, and of course, we've given him plenty of opportunity to play another ship. Now you can see, thankfully we've got that cruiser in front of us. He must have hydro active because we're seeing all sorts of stuff flying in our direction. We are going to be able to make the turn in order to get out of the way of those. Curiously, those 350s do bounce occasionally off of lightly armored targets like the Emerald. So we didn't really run away with anything there. Now we're coming up against kind of my perennial nemesis in this particular ship. The New Mexico is a ship that you'll see a lot of, and that first set of shells we put a little bit too far back on the ship. We're trying to hit him right there, right beneath the front turrets. That's going to allow us to maybe pop his citadel. At least that's the easiest place to do it. This Omaha doesn't know how to leave well enough alone, so as he turns to engage me, throw another set of shells out in his direction. We managed to finish him off. Not going to have too much difficulty penning most of these cruisers. Due to the 350, there are a couple of things that you'll bounce off of in this that you might not have in a 356. Here you can see, this is kind of the experience playing this ship a lot. You run up against a lot of these New Mexicos, even well-aimed shots. He started to back up there, so most of that hit in the bow. But you can see we've landed several shots right at the base of those turrets. We have walked away with one citadel so far, but I feel like in most other ships you do tend to get a little bit more punch here, that you get a few more really devastating hits. And as I'm getting closer, you can see my HP situation is starting to turn from good to not so good, because every second that I'm driving closer to him, I'm making myself more vulnerable. He's able to punch into the front part of my bow and also some of the weaker upper deck pretty easily at this range. One of the reasons why I wouldn't suggest brawling with this particular ship, obviously we just got into secondary range, but probably don't want to be there, right? Because if we're taking big hits like that from other battleships, maybe not quite worth it. But is playing the ship at range a better idea? Probably, even though it is more frustrating because you're going to miss all sorts of shots. In any case, we are going to speed this up a little bit. Even though this is a game that I was playing for review purposes, I do still try to play the game like a normal player. That being, capture bases, try to help the people on my team win games. So here we are in the base, making sure to cap that. And like I said in my opening thoughts on this, the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, the one thing that maybe I do really like about it is the extra bit of speed that you get over most battleships at this tier. That allows you to move around the battlefield a little bit more freely. And now that we've got that, we're going to zoom forward just a little bit further, basically so we can get a better feel for sort of the dispersion. You kind of saw back when I was shooting at that New Mexico that even with a high accuracy captain, you are going to end up with some pretty funky shell dispersion. Obviously, one of those is not so good. The other is quite a bit better. Still, we managed to splash our shells pretty much everywhere except on the actual ship. And this is kind of one of the things that, though the ship reminds me of the Hood's a reasonably accurate ship. And certainly at 10 kilometers, you would be able to hit plenty of things. Some of that stuff is the way that guy was actively maneuvering. Some of it's just bad accuracy on my part. Some of it's the ship. But still, it's an example of what you can expect in terms of accuracy in the Prinz Eitel Friedrich. My team is going to go on to victory here, so a very quick example of what, honestly, a pretty good game looks like in the Prinz Eitel Friedrich. We walk away with 98,000 damage, a whole bunch of miscellaneous rewards. We do walk away with 5 citadels. As you recall, most of those are against cruisers, so punching other battleships kind of feels like a little bit of an uphill struggle. Not as much as you might get with a Scharnhorst with its 12-inch guns, but still the struggle is real. We finish at the top of the charts, and we'll just finish off with the economics of it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for joining me on this brief review of the Prinz Eitel Friedrich, and I hope to see you on the next one.